GBNews. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet is always magnifique, and she joins us now, and we're always very glad to see her. You wrote a kind of defence of Monsieur Macron today, feeling that even though it was objective terms a flop, it was still credible for him to go to Moscow and sit at the other end of that 75-foot table. But did he seriously go there thinking he would accomplish anything?
I think he did. I think he did, because ever since he was elected president 5 years ago, he decided that part of his mandate was to do sort of big beast wrestling, and he tried to charm Donald Trump, with whom it worked to some extent. I mean, remember when Donald Trump was asking for a huge military parade in Washington, and his generals and defense secretary were trying to tell him that it was not the American way? He got the idea from Macron, who put up a big parade on the Champs-Élysées, especially for him. And Macron cultivated Putin. He went and visited Putin in 2018. Before that, soon after his election, he invited Putin at Versailles and had a really sort of grandiose summit there. And when he went to St. Petersburg, he talked to Putin about Chekhov and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, probably more than Putin had heard for quite some time. He thinks that, personal relations could work, and he felt that he could try and make Putin see that it was not logically going to help Russia. And I think there was the failure of understanding from the point of view of Macron was that when you're making that kind of power play, you are thinking a different way. He went twice. He went to Moscow in early February, and in early February, everybody said, the French, once again, are going it alone, and it's very decisive, and it's just telling Putin that we can't do much except talk. So this time, Macron decided to, he knew that the attack was imminent, and actually the attack happened. And he decided to go again, and he put Joe Biden in the loop. He put Boris Johnson, and believe me, I mean, people around his staff said, look, if we put Johnson in the loop for something like this, it tells you that the situation is dire. And he put Olaf Scholz in the loop, and that thing was sort of coordinated, and it didn't work.
Well, wait a minute here, though, because like in America, the thinking, particularly on the right, is that this whole thing, I mean, for whom the actual reality of lived life in Ukraine is fairly distant, their thinking is that this is just a massive distraction, because when you're talking about foreign policy, you're not talking about how lousy Biden's made everything on the domestic front. Then you have the point of view from Europe, where basically your home heating bill is going to be going through the roof. And the German calculation is that if we can blame that on the cartoon villain in the Kremlin, that's better than if we have to blame it on our own stupid policies in not having coal or nuclear, whatever. So there seems to be, regardless of what's happening on the ground, there's the idea of this as a distraction for restive peoples in the West seems to have currency. Is that true in France too?
You have a fairly interesting proportion of the French who actually like Putin, and they do not like to have their dream shattered, so they still support him, and they're slightly worried. But there's also something more interesting about this, is that the great big fault line between Eastern Europe and Western Europe shows that when, Western Europe has been saying that countries like Poland and Hungary didn't have our values because they were horrible reactionaries and knuckle-dragging homophobic. But actually those countries and the Lithuanians and the Estonians are teaching us what values should be, which is standing firm and realizing that, as you said earlier, it's not a question of pronouns, it's a question of people getting into your country with tanks.
Well, do you think that's actually true? It's no doubt in the European Union, particularly in Brussels, that they have to keep slapping down, well, we call them Eastern European, but if you look at the map, it's more Middle European. But we have to keep slapping them down because, as you say, they're anti-immigrant. They've got a slightly homophobic thing about them. Putin, for example, you never need to ask him what his pronouns are. He's advertising them. He doesn't need to stick them on his Twitter feed. Yet somehow then, when it comes, these people don't share our values, but we have to go to war for them. That's basically the argument, isn't it?
But, I mean, already the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Estonians know that they're next. And they are members of NATO and they are made members of the European Union. And if you think Putin is going to stop what he already wants out of Ukraine, and it's something that too many Europeans, Western Europeans, have accepted, it's Finlandization, which is a pretty word for a situation where you have no foreign policy, where you have Russian-approved censorship on your media, and where nasty things happen to your politicians when they don't toe the line. I mean, we know, and that is actually true, that there have been threats by Putin of what he calls the guilty parties being made to suffer. But that really means that he's actually got the kill list that Joe Biden was talking about. If you think that such a character, considering his country is unable to export anything manufactured and except gas and oligarchs, he needs the diversion, and there's no reason why he should stop. He just took one bite, and then he will take other bites.
But yesterday, for example, you're quite right about the Russian economy. You go through your house and there's nothing that says made in Russia on the bottom of a household item other than the vodka bottle. But if you take yesterday and the day before that, Russia is exporting whatever it is, 700,000 barrels of oil a day to the United States, because the United States, in its own version of this net zero thing that Germany and the UK are hot for, it closed down the Keystone pipeline. So instead of getting its energy from Canada, which is one authoritarian strongman state, it's now getting it from Russia, another authoritarian strongman state. Putin looks at this and thinks this is ridiculous. You don't go down to your local petrol station and threaten the guy behind the register and then be surprised when suddenly you can't get any petrol. I mean, basically, he doesn't need products. He makes the one thing Europe and America needs, which is gas and oil. And because of that, he's sitting pretty, and they're just in la-la land talking about net zero.
I don't know whether in America and Britain you've seen those pictures of all those generals and members of Putin's cabinet listening to his speech about the Donbass and Donetsk. And I thought what was really interesting is they did not look happy at all. They made me think of the cohorts with Kim Jong-un in North Korea listening to the great leader, because otherwise things will happen to them. And I think Putin himself hasn't got that much of a control on a country where the life expectancy is somewhere like 60, and where, apart from those wonderful showcases that are Moscow and Petersburg, the country is in dire poverty.
Do you think war is going to spread, Anne-Elisabeth? I mean, clearly for places like Poland and Czechia and Bulgaria and Romania, they think this isn't going to stop in Ukraine. If he gets away with it, he's going to move west. Is that how it's seen in Paris?
Yes. I think in Paris they realize that Putin also controls Germany, which is why finally, and I think Macron should get part of the credit for that, Olaf Scholz, the new Social Democrat Chancellor of Germany, decided to stop the operations on Nord Stream 2, which is the gas pipeline that Russia was constructing. On the other hand, if Russia controls Ukraine, it doesn't need to build a different pipeline to not have a pipeline through Ukraine, because it will be controlling Ukraine. But there's a general feeling that Putin will digest those parts of Ukraine, and then he'll look at Kiev and decide that what would be really nice in Kiev would be an entirely different president, like somebody who essentially rings him up whenever he has to take a decision, and that's perfectly manageable. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who's been very brave in this, he's a man who flew over to the Munich conference to say, to tell all the grandees of international defense met together that Ukraine would end up fighting alone, and that was, he made me think, if you have memories of that, I mean, not personal, of the Haile Selassie going to the League of Nations in Geneva in 1936, and help against Mussolini, and of course nothing happened, and that was something like that. It was touching, and it showed things that ought to prompt questions in Western Europe. I find this dangerous and worrisome for ourselves. It threatens us.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? It's only a third of a century since communism came all the way to eastern Berlin, to Checkpoint Charlie. And we would find that very funny to think about the Russian zone, as it were, extending that far west right now. But Putin doesn't think it's so funny, does he? He thinks that's actually, it was that way once and it can be that way again.
And Putin himself was a KGB officer in East Germany. That's where he started his career and made a kind of name. So this is something that he's got personally living memory of it. The other thing is that he's been flooding the zone in Russia for years, decades, about how Ukrainians are fascists and Nazis. It's not terribly difficult to say that the Germans are fascists and Nazis because there's a Russian memory of that. I don't think he's finished if he's not finished himself.
No, that's very interesting. That's true. He was the KGB guy in East Germany, and when the electrodes didn't work, he'd sing "I Found My Thrill on Blueberry Hill" to them. So it all came together. It all proved very useful. Thank you, Anne-Elisabeth.